And the name of today's webinar is Our Approach to Technical Monitoring and Evaluation, M&E, at the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. And my name is Jim Harper. I'm the communications specialist here at the Innovation Lab, and we're based at the University of Florida, and we are implemented in cooperation with ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute. And if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see our two funders are USAID and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so today we're going to be hearing from two of our experts in monitoring and evaluation. So let me go ahead and just quickly introduce them to you. We have Dr. Erica Odera, who is the Monitoring Evaluation Impact Specialist in the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems at the University of Florida. And we also have Dr. Sebastian Galindo, who is a Research Assistant Professor in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication at the University of Florida. And he is our faculty lead for technical monitoring and evaluation here at the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. You might hear us talk about the Innovation Lab or the Livestock Lab as shorthand. And we're all united in this effort to address issues in livestock systems. So today we have the issue of monitoring and evaluation, and I'm really glad that we have our speakers here today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. Sebastian.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or good night, depending where you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today. As Jim mentioned, we will be talking about things that we have done here at the lab related to during an evaluation of the lab, and some of the decisions, the challenges that we have being presented with, the decisions that we have made, and also how we have tried to integrate theory into practice. On Erica's and my behalf, thank you again, and let's move forward. Again, if you have questions, please use the chat box for those, and then Jim will be looking at your questions and then sharing them, and we will also look at the questions. So the purpose of today's presentation is to describe the choices made to structure and carry out this adaptive, and we're going to explain about why our approach is adaptive and why it is theory-driven to evaluation within the context of this multi-project lab. We're going to discuss some of the challenges and also some of the solutions that we have crafted for those. If we can call some of them solutions, maybe we're still working on some of them to really solve the issues. And we have done this to keep a strong monitoring and accountability, while at the same time fostering adaptive learning for the organization. And again, we want to demonstrate the critical role of theory to inform the evaluation process and the intrinsic relationships of M&E with organizational learning. Now, just because we're going to be talking about the lab, and the lab really is huge in terms of the different components and all the projects that are underneath it, this doesn't mean that what we're going to share here cannot be applied to other projects that are smaller. So when we are talking about the things that we have done and some of the recommendations, these recommendations could apply to any size of project. How we have organized the presentation, we are going to talk first, talk a little about the background, why monitoring and evaluation and learning are important, some of the initial development of the lab and the evaluation component, and then we will discuss during the implementation of the M&E structure, some of the contextual background information and 5 approaches that we have identified as relevant to share with you. And at the end, some implications and recommendations for practice. Now, to begin with the background, the important thing is If you look at this slide, the main thing on this slide is a huge black box on the middle of the slide, on the center of the slide. And this is kind of the traditional way in which evaluation was seen before. We started on the left with the situation that can be a need, a gap, or an issue that needs to be addressed. Then people will come, develop this program or intervention, put it in place, and then at the end, measure or explore in some way if change happened or didn't happen. What is it related to the desired situation? So, not strangely or originally, this is called the black box paradigm. It's a way of looking at this. So you have the program is the input, and then you look at the outputs and outcomes, but you don't know what is going inside. So a different way of conceptualizing this, and this is how we do it, is to move into a transparent box paradigm. So we are really interested in looking at the program. When we look at the program, really is the program theory. And the program theory is made of three different components that are the organizational plan, the service utilization plan, and the impact theory. And on the next slide, I am going to elaborate a little more on this so you can see how they connect. But the important thing here is that here you can have, it is more clear if change is happening or not happening. It will be easier to look at what elements of the program are contributing or not contributing to the changes or the lack of change. And also this gives an opportunity to improve during implementation of the program. It is not a hit and miss approach like the previous one where you have the program and then at the end you see if there were changes or not. In this, the organizations, the programs, the projects have an opportunity to use information to change the things that they are doing. And then therefore learning and improvement can happen throughout the life of the project or the program. This slide is from a very well-known book on evaluation from Rossi, Lipsy, and Freeman. And this brings together this program theory. What are the things that make the program theory? As I mentioned before, we have a service utilization plan that basically talks about how the target audience or audiences interact with the program at different stages, this target population. Then you have the program here that talks about how the program is structured, what are the resources that the program has, who is part of that program, and what are the activities, the things that are made, that are conducted as part of the implementation of the program, that is the program's organizational plan. There is a lot of interaction on transactions that happen between the program and the environment where the users are. And all of these should lead, given the right conditions, to some proximal outcomes. And outcomes are really tangible things that you can count, that are more like, for example, the number of publications, the number of workshops, webinars like this one, how many webinars did we have in a year, how many people attended each webinar. And then to distal outcomes that can be short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and we talk about these changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills, and aspirations, mainly at the short-term, changes in practice or behavior at the mid-term, and then changes in the social, environmental, or economic condition, that situation that I mentioned before that we are addressing. So this is something to give you an idea of what we're talking about and why thinking about program theory is important. Now, something that I want to share with you, that we want to share, is that evaluation has evolved a lot over the years. At the beginning, evaluation was just this practice that where evaluators were judges. They will just look at those changes or the lack of change, and then give you a fail or pass kind of grade. And that was the essence of evaluation. But evaluation has moved through different generations. That is how some authors have referred to the evolution of evaluation. And we identify with Patton's perspective on evaluation, that is the developmental evaluation. And he outlines 8 essential principles that should guide the developmental evaluation process. We believe that this approach is appropriate given the characteristics of a lab, of the innovation lab, and some other projects. And as I go through these principles, you will see why this is important. The first one is the developmental purpose, and that means that evaluation is not something static or fixed. It's something that it is as alive as the program or project that we are evaluating is. The projects change a lot. All of you that have done research or implemented any project, you know that you do the best to plan, to have a great plan before you go out. But when you hit reality, or when reality hits you on the field, many things do not go as planned. So the program needs to adapt, and therefore evaluation also needs to be adaptive and responsive. Evaluation rigor. We need to use rigorous and proven methods because we are generating evidence that should be used by the program to make decisions and for many other things. And we will talk about that also. Also, the focus should be in using the information that is generated. An evaluation that, if the results of an evaluation are not used by the program, then it doesn't make sense to conduct an evaluation. It is a waste of time and resources and many other things. Also, this idea of innovation niche. As I mentioned before, we need to be adaptive and responsive. And in this case, evaluation needs to be open to new avenues and new things. Like, for example, in another project that I am evaluating now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we were forced to become, even though it was not part of the original plan of our evaluation program, now we are in charge. We were tasked by the research team with leading all the data collection related to COVID-19, so the organization can use that evidence to coordinate, well, to design and coordinate the response that we're going to have to COVID-19. So that is an example of innovation, being responsive to an emerging issue. Also, the complexity perspective. We understand that there are many different elements. A lab, an organization like the Innovation Lab, is made of many different components that are interrelated, and we need to understand those interactions, those relationships. Also, that the lab is not floating in a vacuum. The lab is part of a system, and we need to understand that within that system, there is an internal component of the lab, and there is an external environment, and the lab needs to be open and interacts. And many times, evaluation, not just in this project, but in many other projects, evaluation plays a role. I imagine like a window. We are a window that many times is connecting the organization, the program, with the external environment and bringing information that helps inform many of the things that happen inside the project. Co-creation is another one. Is this idea of being participatory on involving the different stakeholders, internal and external, in the evaluation process, because we really want evaluation to be relevant, to provide information that can be used. And for that, listening to all these voices, to their needs and the information needs that they have in particular is very important. And also providing the feedback on a timely feedback, on time, giving reports, sharing information. And this can be even informal feedback, not wait until we have the final report. If we are looking at something and have some preliminary data, approach the people that can make the decisions and share this information with them so they can start responding. And that leads to learning. And that is why normally we talk about M&E, monitoring and evaluation, and throughout this presentation, we are going to talk about M&E, but we wanted to make sure that you understand that really it is M&E plus L. Learning is a key component, because particularly in an organization like the Innovation Lab, that is it's a long term, it's 5 years with the possibility of also extending another 5 years. It's an organization that evolves, and as an organization that evolves, needs to learn about what is going on, what is happening. And a learning organization is an organization that recognizes that learning happens across all units and levels at the same time. So the whole organization is learning, and there needs to be some type of system in place to help that information, that learning, that knowledge stay and be used in the organization. It promotes the system thinking and the organizational memory. That is why evaluation is so important, because we create a lot of documents, a lot of records that are there to show how we have done in the past, how we are doing, and also and can be used to determine where we are going based on that organizational memory. And also, it demonstrates the organizational capacity for change, particularly when we use that information to understand what is going on in the external environment, and the external environment to adapt and to change. And involves the widespread participation of stakeholders in decision-making and information sharing. And this is something that is, all of you that have been interacting with the Innovation Lab, with the Livestock Systems Innovation Lab, know that this is at the core of what we do. At all levels, the lab always involves all different stakeholders in the process. Now, before we finish this background on monitoring and evaluation and learning, obviously, evaluation is concerned. There are many definitions on what evaluation is or is not, but evaluation is a flavor of research, and we really are concerned with documenting, studying, and assessing change, or the lack of change as a result of the implementation of a program. And because of that focus on change, it is very important that we also embed theories of change in our evaluation process, because we need to understand change, and to understand change, we need a frame of reference. And that frame of reference, that framework, needs to include relevant theories. There are many theories of change, and we use not only one, but probably Rogers' diffusion of innovations, with all its weaknesses that the same Rogers has recognized and addressed in his book, is probably the theory that we use to inform the most, because we are interested in the elements of diffusion, particularly the actual innovation, that is what the lab develops, and also how that disseminates or can get to the final user, so the innovations are adopted and at the end of the day have an impact on the situation that the lab wants to address. And also looking at the innovation in particular, there are 5 attributes of innovations that we have also used in our evaluation plan. I am not going to talk too much about this because Jim already, and you are familiar with this, but really just as a reminder, the Feed the Future is a US government's initiative. That was created to reduce global hunger, undernutrition, and extreme poverty. Within that, there are innovation labs that are these specialized hubs responsible for implementing the Feed the Future initiative. And the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems that was established in 2015, as Jim mentioned, is led by the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences in partnership with the International Livestock Research Institute. When we started the lab, and during the first 60 days after the award, we were responsible for working on this performance monitoring plan that has many different components inside it. It has all the results frameworks that Erica is going to talk about that in a moment, but also the theory of change, and definition sheets for each one of the indicators that we have. And when we started working on that process, it was clear for the evaluation team that this is a different animal than a regular program or project that we evaluate, because sometimes you feel like you are like in a sandwich, because we have on one hand we report directly to USAID, and we need to meet, like in a regular grant, all these reporting requirements and things like that. But also we have sub-awardees that also we need to make sure that the reporting system is extended to them in the same in a way that is consistent, so it will allow for the integration of the information, and then we can report to USAID as the whole of the lab. And the lab includes the management entity, the different research areas that we have, and also cross-cutting themes like gender, human and institutional capacity development, nutrition, and policy. Now, to simplify this process, because USAID has a very structured reporting system or requirement, they have developed a framework of indicators that help to standardize M&E across the program. Now, most of these indicators are focused on outputs rather than outcomes, and that means more on what I mentioned before, tangible things that can be counted rather than changes that may be happening. And I am saying this in a very positive way, because it makes sense given the magnitude, the size of all the projects, the number of projects that are under this umbrella of Feed the Future, and the difficulty to standardize the measurement of outcomes. It is obvious that the focus should be on outputs. However, the different projects have the capacity to also develop custom indicators that look more at those outcomes, at those changes. And some of the indicators also that are there are not so much for the individual projects, but rather for the larger program for integration, so they can get information from some of the others and integrate in terms of looking at that outcome. One of the things that we did also at the beginning was to kind of deconstruct or dissect what we were going to do as an evaluation team in the lab. And we created this roadmap. And this roadmap has 3 steps. On step 1 is what we call the innovation evaluations. Is a time where we meet with is the first contact that we have with as evaluation team with the sub-awardees to talk about the work that they are doing and how do they see this work moving in the future, particularly in terms of the attributes of the innovations and the characteristics of those innovation in relation to the social systems, that the communication channels that are those organizations that can uptake and disseminate the innovations, and also the social systems where the end users are embedded. Then the dissemination studies that looking at, okay, how are these innovations being uptaken and then disseminated, or what are the barriers or the things affecting this process? And finally, impact evaluations to see if as a result of adoption, the development of innovation and also the adoption, we are having an impact. So this is a roadmap. Keep it in mind because it is related with some of the, as we present the approaches, that is something that is related to what you're going to see. Erica, now going back to you.
Yes, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. And these next few slides, I'm going to talk you through a little bit of the contextual background of actually implementing the monitoring and evaluation structure, and also start off on some of our unique approaches, and then Sebastian will talk about some as well. So to give you a little bit of context about our lab, one of the very unique challenges, but also I find really fascinating opportunities in our lab, is that when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, Sebastian and I have to think of things at 3 different levels. So we are a very large lab with dozens of funded projects that take place in different places throughout the world. So we have to consider activities, indicators, objectives at the individual project level. But we're also housed here in Gainesville, Florida. We have regional coordinators throughout the world as well. So there's also a management entity level of how we manage the projects and activities that we do ourselves as part of the management entity. And finally, all of the things that we're doing are trying to improve and sustain the livestock sector itself as a whole within developing countries. So we're always considering activities and how to do good monitoring and evaluation at all three of those levels. Okay, the next slide. And along with that, there's also three major components that influence our monitoring evaluation structure. You can think of this as reasons why we're doing monitoring and evaluation. So the first, of course, is one of the most common for any government-funded project like ours, which is accountability. We have standardized indicators that we have to report on for USAID and for the United States government. We need to be transparent in our procedures. We need to do things that are ethical and environmentally safe. Those are just all part of being good stewards of taxpayer money and doing things in an accountable, responsible way. Evaluation almost always is dealing with accountability in some sense. However, for us, we also have two additional purposes for our monitoring and evaluation structure. And the first, Sebastian spoke about briefly, is this idea of learning. So we have this excellent resource of being a management entity where we can provide resources to our individual projects, and we can communicate to USAID and our other donors. So we want to use monitoring and evaluation data for management decisions. We want to be able to foster learning in an open environment at that level as well. And finally, the third component is perhaps unique because we are at a university setting. Sebastian and I are, scholars that study evaluation in addition to doing it. So we also do monitoring and evaluation work for scholarship. So that's academic scholarship related to international development and why certain types of projects and approaches work, as well as evaluation science as a field of study where both Sebastian and I focus our own work. So we have three areas, and all of these affect the way that we work. The next slide. So I'm going to give you just two examples of how we actually implement this and different approaches that we use in the lab. So the first approach that I'll speak about is something that we call a results framework. So this is a way that allows projects or major programs like ours to align the different objectives that you're working towards with the indicators that you're trying to quantify and measure. So while that sounds maybe a little complex, the main purpose of this is if you're counting something, in our case, maybe the number of students that receive some sort of training through a research project. If you measure that, if you have a results framework, you're able to answer the question, for what research objective or what project objective were those students trained? And so the lab has created these sorts of results frameworks at two levels. So at the management entity ourselves, so at a very broad level, all the way down to the individual funded project. And both types of results frameworks have a mix of standardized USAID indicators that are relevant to the project or the management entity, as well as specialized indicators that we've created ourselves as a lab. And what's really unique about this approach, and I'm relatively new to the lab, so this is my first year in this position, and what I've found unique about this approach is that it allows for different questions to be asked at different levels of analysis. So you can ask, and you see here in the picture on the right, at the micro level, you can ask, just like the example I showed, for what purpose was this individual student trained in this individual project? And that's great for management purposes and being able to check in with our PIs. But it also allows for a mid-level sort of question. You can ask things like, in the last 3 years, how many students have we trained within East Africa or within projects that focus on improving dairy sectors in developing countries? So we can ask things that group project attributes. And then finally, of course, we can ask questions at the macro level. So the total effect or the total effort of our management entity funded projects. And at the macro level is what we report also for our annual reporting. Okay, the next slide. These are just two visual components so that you guys could sort of see what I mean when I'm talking about a results framework. I mean sort of, in essence, a formatted table, a way that you can see a specific objective tied to a specific indicator. At the very top, you see an objective that's related to our management entity itself. In this case, an objective related to having high standards in management performance. And you see under there that there's a specific intermediate result and then these specific indicators that are custom created for our lab. And at the bottom, you can see a similar format, and in this case, it's for an individual funded project, so that the objective is very specific. It's about a certain type of research method to understand milk situations in Rwanda. And underneath that is a specific indicator related to that objective. So every project has almost a timeline, a timestamp of all of these things and how much they have achieved quantitatively throughout the years. Next slide. The second approach I'd like to talk about is using technology for our reporting. So we are an enormous lab. We have dozens of projects, like I mentioned. If we were to have individual emails or individual paper trails for every single project, for all of the dozens of indicators that we report on, it would be really untenable. And so one approach that the lab does is it uses technology to help streamline data collection as well as to streamline the reporting experience for our PIs. So if I'm a PI and I have a project and maybe my project has 5 indicators, this particular website structure allows me to receive individualized, like a specialized website that will only have those 5 indicators for me to report about. So this approach is a company called PyStar that's out of Kansas, and they've created a website system that functions as a portal. So it has modules that you see here on the right. You'll see on the right of your screen that we have some custom indicators and standardized Feed the Future indicators. And those are just essentially modules. If you've ever done like an online course or something, you click on a specific module and then you'll answer multiple questions about that particular indicator. And on the very left, you'll see that it also functions as a communication portal. We can send reminders to all of our projects. We can send announcements. We can post photos of project achievements or activities. So that's a wonderful component of the website. And in the middle, this is sort of what I do. So in the middle, you can see that there's 2 individual funded projects. In this case, this indicator is about short-term training. I'm able to see all of the trainings or all of the students or whatever it is that I'm looking at in one spot, and I'm able to clean and work with the data as a whole in that way. And so that's a unique approach that our lab has as well. Okay, the next slide.
Okay, I think this is mine again. Another approach, and this relates to the roadmap that I showed before, is related to the innovation studies. This is the first step in the roadmap. And when we started this, well, the purpose is to identify these alignments or misalignments that may exist among the innovation attributes, the communication channels, and the social system. And even the time, because time is another component of Rogers' theory in terms of the diffusion of innovations. And obviously, in terms of time, everybody that has written a grant proposal and then received the money realize that we always underestimate time for many different components. But in terms of the dissemination, also time plays a key role there. Now, when we started this, there was a lot of since this was the first time that the evaluation team was meeting with the sub-awardees, there was a lot of anxiety on the side of the sub-awardees because there is this negative connotation of evaluation. A lot of people see evaluation as a pass or fail type of activity. So I need to show everything that I am doing and that I am doing it correctly, and all those different things. I don't want to have a fail result. And the reality is that we decided to approach this as a learning opportunity for everybody, not just for the subawardees, but also for us. And that was very helpful. We did this in a very friendly way with a formal and informal conversations with the subawardees. And this created a great environment for reflection on the side of the subawardee and also on our side. And it was clear that for many, well, we all were able to see the projects from new perspectives, because as evaluators, we have read the proposals and we have evaluated those proposals originally. And when they got funded, we worked with them in setting up the initial evaluation systems in place, procedures and tools. We also have developed some materials to support the subawardees in terms of conducting evaluations for trainings and for other things. But this was a really nice opportunity for us. We realized that for some researchers, they haven't thought about the attributes of the innovation that they were developing. They knew that the innovation was needed because there's a problem that they have identified, and the innovation was needed and was a good solution, or probably the best solution, but they haven't thought about the attributes of that innovation in terms of the relative advantage and other things, the compatibility and other of these attributes identified by Rogers, and how these align with the potential organizations that can uptake this innovation and disseminate the innovation, and also with the characteristics of the social system. So this was a really interesting exercise. And also, for example, in some cases, we realized that there were studies that they were doing great already, that farmers that were participating, producers that were participating were really excited because they could see the innovation working and they wanted to adopt it, and they see the value and the benefits of that. However, then probably some of the inputs necessary for using that innovation or adopting that innovation were not in place in the country. So that was something that allowed the researchers to think about this, that was a barrier that was going to be there for adoption, for dissemination and adoption, and they could start doing something about that. Because of that, of what we learned, we decided to revise the timing. Originally, we were supposed to do this probably at some point across the midpoint of the project implementation, but we realized that the earlier that we started having these conversations with the subawardees, the better, and also that this was something that should continue throughout the life of the project, and also probably even we decided to include an exit interview where we also will capture more about the lessons learned, that things that giving the opportunity to the subawardees to further reflect on what they did and what they learned in the process. Another approach is the dissemination studies. That is the second step on the roadmap. And when we got to this stage, we've immediately found two main challenges that we have not anticipated. The first one was related to since this was planned to happen after project completion, then obviously there were no funds available on the subawardee side to do this. And also this was something that was not included in the original scope of their work. So in many cases, it was very difficult or maybe even impossible to reach out to some of the participants unless the researchers still had a working relationship, probably with another project or something, a follow-up of the initial project with them, and then have access to collecting data, but still the funding was an issue. The next issue is related to limitations on the mission and mandate of the Livestock Systems Innovation Lab. And we had very interesting discussions there, because we get to a gray area, because really the lab the mandate of the lab is to support the development of the innovations. And then when you get to really the scaling and dissemination, that is not really included. But we really need to do it because as an evaluation team, we are tasked also with trying to assess the impact of what our work is having. And the impact is more than developing the innovation. Really, developing the innovation is the first stage, but we really want that innovation to go out and to be adopted and to be reinvented many, many times, because that is something that happens. And at the end of the day, have an impact on the social, economic, or environmental situation that we want to address. So some of the things that we did and as we learned throughout this process was first, we asked subawardees to develop scaling plans, to start thinking about this during implementation. So that way, at least they were starting to identify, if they have not done that before, identify the key stakeholders, the key organizations that should be part of this scaling when their innovation was ready to move to the next step. And we help them with our regional coordinators and also with faculty here at UF. We develop and revise scaling plans for them. Something that has worked really well also is a partnership with academic programs at UF, specifically with the Master of Sustainable Development Practice. We have gotten a lot of really good students, graduate students, that are part of that program, that do conduct internships with the lab, and then for their practicum, they go to some of the countries where we are working, and they conduct some of these studies related with the dissemination process. And that is helping us a lot. And also it was immediately clear the key value that other activities that the lab does, like for example, the innovation platforms, the symposia. Every year we try to have a nutrition symposium, and also the annual meetings, how important those activities were to really bring different stakeholders together and get people to talk, researchers with organizations that can help in the dissemination, and also the perspective of some producers, of some potential users. And some of the information from evaluation have helped to shape in some degree some of these activities conducted by the lab. The final approach that we want to talk with you about today is impact assessment. We haven't started yet this because this is something that was originally planned to a year and a half after project completion. Obviously, that is not an ideal time frame because we know that impact may take way more than that, but we need to work within timeframes that can work with the time that we have. Now, those of you that have done evaluation, you know that there are many different challenges associated with impact evaluation. And if you look at the figure that I have here, when you think about the activities, it is really easy to keep track of the activities and the products, the outputs that come out of those activities. When you start moving into the outcomes, short-term outcomes are relatively easy to measure, particularly if you have good instruments. You can measure the changes in knowledge, skills, aspirations. But when you get to mid or intermediate outcomes, those start to become more difficult because those involve a change in practice. And you need a way to either observe that practice or to record that practice, either self-reported or something like that, to really, or depending on the product, there may be other indicators that show that that product or that practice is being used. And then in the long term, that becomes almost impossible in many cases, because the long term, we're talking about these changes at the level of the condition that we want to address. And there are so many confounding factors, so many things that we have no control, so many variables outside of our control, that it is almost impossible to really, particularly to talk about attribution, to attribute a particular change to the work of a particular program. And also, it is very expensive and time consuming. So even though we have not started this yet, we have also already revised this process and rethought this process in terms of how we're going to do this. And we have decided to use theory-based evaluation approaches. And basically, this is like thinking about, based on the theories of change that we have, the logic models and all those different things, if we can get some points in time, particularly the level of the intermediate outcomes, that we can be certain that we are measuring them correctly, that we have the right indicators, and then develop some criteria for how we're going to say if one of those outcomes count or not. Based on that, develop a theory, based on theory in terms of the potential contribution that may be having in the situation. In particular, we have decided to use contribution analysis that basically works like that, based on measuring intermediate outcomes, documenting intermediate outcomes, the practice, the changes in behavior, or the use of some of the products developed by the lab, and using our theory of change and also our logic model through a panel of experts, judge, okay, this may be leading to this impact. And the issue here, this is a method that is widely used and valid, but we also, as Erica mentioned, we want to move forward the scholarship of evaluation. So one of the things that we have been thinking about is that, okay, the theory of change is good and the logic model is good, and we use those tools a lot, but they are program-centered approaches. They are tools that are developed around the program. And obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, program theory should consider the problem that it is addressing. But many times, many programs, they don't have really clearly defined the problem that they are addressing. Or in the case of the lab, we are addressing a problem that is so complex and has so many other problems associated with it that we need to look more closely at those problems. So what we want to do is to look more closely at those problems, conduct systematic literature reviews to really identify what the problem is, what are the root causes of that problem and the consequences of that problem, and then use that to develop impact pathways that can help us strengthen the process of the contribution analysis. In addition to the expert judgment, only using the theory of change and the logic model, use those lit reviews that will be mapping the potential pathways that exist. Now we get to the final part of our presentation, implication and recommendations. And let me, Erica, go ahead.
Yes, so from all that you've heard us talk about, I did want to mention a few, I guess, lessons that I've learned or recommendations that I might give to others working in this sort of area. The first thing is, if you're working in a big lab like this, or you have many funded projects, consider the level of skill and comfort with monitoring and evaluation of the people that you're working with. So we have many sub-awardees across many countries, all of whom are technical scientists or nutrition scientists and may or may not be familiar with monitoring and evaluation, or may not be familiar with social science. So consider that, consider training, consider approaching it in a way that is non-threatening, and make sure that they see that you're there in service to them as opposed to rendering judgment. You know, you want to maintain a positive relationship and also show that M&E can be a useful partnership. The second is also a pragmatic one. Donor requirements can change. The USAID standardized indicators we work with did undergo change during the transition in which I took this position. And that's a challenge if you have systems that are very linear or very structured, to be able to adapt to changing requirements or changes on the ground. That's an important component to put into any M&E system. Something as simple as just keep all the data you need about participants or trainings or research materials, and if donor requirements change, you just shift those materials to fit a new structure. And the last one is, if any one of you work in any sort of research in general, you know that there's always trade-offs between data collection, between the issues of quality, usability, and resources. You can have the most perfect data set, but it took too long to get, or it took too much money, or it frustrated people too much, and then it becomes less usable. Or you can have something that's incredibly usable or fast, but it doesn't have the quality you need to make decisions. And we're always up against resources of time and money, staff, ability, things like that. So those are always trade-offs. You always need to balance those three things. Next slide.
Yes, some other recommendations is the role of evaluation. Please always, we encourage people to think about evaluation as a learning activity, and we have talked about that throughout the presentation, so I am not going to elaborate more on that. The integration of evaluation and research, again, to move the scholarship forward and not just conducting evaluation to just for checking boxes or for because it is a requirement. It is something that can be very valuable and can help really enhance the project. And also, regardless of the size of the program or project that you have, bring people with expertise in evaluation from the beginning when you are thinking about the project, because that helps a lot. I work with many teams, and that is something really useful. And I always use, for example, I have the first meeting with them, and the first thing that I tell them, we need to develop a logic model, because the logic model is not just an evaluation tool. It is a planning tool. It is a communication tool. It has many different uses. And developing a logic model helps everybody be on the same page and develop a stronger proposals even, because when you write the proposal, if you have a good logic model, it is easier to connect all the different things. There's this chain of logic running from one element to the next. And if your project is small and you don't have money for an evaluator or something, at least access evaluation resources that are available online. Most agencies and foundations, private donors, they have really good resources online that can help you develop or start thinking about evaluation for your program and develop some good evaluation. Finally, I mentioned this and Erica mentioned this, using the evaluation findings. Moving from the data that we collect, transforming that data into information that can be used for decision making and ultimately for change. So if you do this, if you use the evaluation findings, you can enhance the program processes. There's always room for improvement. Everything that we do, we can always do better. You can also use that information to support decision making, but use evidence-based decision making. You can decide to continue, modify, or discontinue activities that you are doing. You can understand and communicate the progress and value of the activities, outputs, and outcomes that your program is achieving. And ultimately, you can fulfill the mission of the project. What is the reason that your program exists? What is the ultimate goal? And if you use information from evaluation to do this, you will be closer to that. Even if you cannot measure it, as I already said, even if we cannot actually measure that impact and say this is the result of this, if we take these steps, we will be closer to being certain, within a certain degree of confidence to say that we are fulfilling the mission of the project. We want to thank the general support of the American people through USAID for everything that we do at the lab, and we want to thank you for your attention. And now we're opening this for questions. Sorry it took longer than we thought, but Eric and we talked too much.
That's okay, Sebastian. It was very engaging. So I noticed that most people stayed on the line. We didn't lose them. So we have a few questions we'll try to get to quickly. Let me just jump in with the first one, and either of you can answer. Does the M&E allow for post-project evaluation in terms of sustainability of changes when the project is ended and there's no project support?
Ideally, we will need to get more money for that, or we will need to probably secure additional funding, or maybe if somehow we can integrate that into the impact evaluation, that is something that we want to do, yes, because that is a key question. We have a lot of projects, not us, but in general, there are many projects that once the money is gone, after 10 years or 5 years, there's nothing there. So it will be really interesting to look, if we're interested in identifying the best practices for evaluation, for research for development, sustainability is a key issue. So this is something that we should try to do, yeah.
And I will jump in there and say that there's been 2 dissemination studies that have occurred through the use of Masters of Sustainable Development practice students. And those do at least touch on some of those topics, where those students went to Nepal and Rwanda and looked at some projects that had recently ended. So this is not impact 10 years, down the road, but impact 1 year down the road, and did find different kind of social barriers and enabling factors that contributed to why people did or didn't uptake an innovation. So we do have that component in the lab.
We have a question here from one of our PIs, Emily Uma. She agrees that our structure focuses more on outputs and less on outcomes. Are there opportunities to complement that with other tools, such as contribution analysis, that will document cause and effect of the softer attributes and outcomes?
Yes, definitely. When we start working on the impact assessments, we will reach out to our sub-awardees, past and current, to start working on those using contribution analysis and applying there. Yes, and I would love to work with you, Emily.
And I'll contribute to that as well, in that we have cross-cutting theme and area of inquiry leaders here at the University of Florida. So the cross-cutting themes in particular deal with social science aspects of capacity development of people, gender integration, policy issues. And so our evaluation team, we're starting now to work with those faculty to try to do studies that look at those aspects within funded projects and across funded projects. So, Emily Uma, you may be hearing from us about some of those studies.
All right, we just have a few more questions, and I think we're getting towards the end of our hour, but let's go ahead and continue. This one is from Glenn Galloway. What strategies are being pursued to encourage future follow-up on your impact evaluation findings? And he's also saying, since the lab will often not be present.
Well,
about strategies.
Yeah, well, there are many different ideas on the table, but I think something that we have discussed as an evaluation team is to also try to secure additional funding, look for other funding opportunities that can help us look more closely and follow up evaluation of these projects. We are really interested in resilience, for example, as one of the outcomes of the projects that the lab has funded. So Eric and I have discussed this also with the leadership of the lab in terms of our interest of securing additional funding to do that, and involving other players. We can also partner with other people to do this.
All right, and let's just have 2 more questions. Some of the other ones we may have to take offline, but I did put up our email address, so you can always contact us. If you look in the chat, you'll see the email address at livestocklab@ufl.edu. This is from Zalem Moti. For the innovation platforms, what are the indicators used to monitor changes on stakeholders?
Well, Erica, did you want to tackle this one? Because this is something that is now, as we move into the next cycle, this is something that Erica has been working on.
Yes, so in the past, the way that we've been measuring changes on stakeholders from these meetings has been essentially like a satisfaction survey that talks about people's experience while at the meeting. How satisfied were they with different aspects? Did they feel they communicated with others? Would they attend again? Those sorts of things. One way that I've been very interested in moving that for the future is to try to capture the relationships between stakeholders that have occurred as a result. So I've proposed adding an indicator, a custom one for our lab, that looks at the number of past relationships or like networks that continue from year to year, as well as those that are new. So we know that that's a really important component for, you know, stakeholder platforms like this.
And we can look at some additional products of those collaborations, of those interactions. If those interactions have been enhanced, are they publishing together? Have they submitted the proposal together? What are they doing in addition to, okay, there's more interaction, but what are the indicators? What are the things that we can measure? Yeah.
Yes, and I should mention that a study that we are co-leading with the policy cross-cutting theme leader is going to explicitly delve into that issue. So we'll be looking at the relationships that develop between stakeholders, but also the way that they use information, and also changes in their behavior and intentions from the future as a result. So that one will be much more detailed. So not indicators we would track over time, but really a deep dive study into that issue.
All right, so I want to say thank you to our speakers and even to our participants as we've reached the end of our hour. I will ask this one more question and then allow you to make any final comments, speakers, that you would like to make. This question is from Leon Guaca. Can unintended positive outcomes be the basis for further support of a project despite limited success on the original intention?
That is a fascinating question. That's actually was my dissertation topic. So yes,
There you go.
I believe that that is often the case when we look at, there's the physical things a project wants to achieve. In a lot of our cases, there are research outcomes or the physical development of an innovation. Sometimes those have, you know, varying levels of success depending on contextual factors or whatever the issue may be. One of the benefits of partnering with our cross-cutting theme leaders that study social science topics is we may be able to understand maybe a project failed in terms of a technology, but it created such a relationship between people on the ground that if we studied that and captured that, even if that project doesn't continue the way that it was originally designed, we may still be able to learn about what worked in that project when it came to the relationships. And so, yes, I think that that does occur at times, or maybe even more often than we think.
And just to add to that, actually, when we look at impact assessment, at impact evaluation, we are interested also in identifying those unintended or unanticipated consequences that may be positive or negative. And we want to also document those. And just like that question is saying, at some point, probably those unanticipated consequences may be even better than the original intent of the project. Even though the original intent was not achieved, there is something that now we know that is out there that is worthy of pursuing.
All right, well, thank you so much for this time that you've spent with us today online. We hope that everyone has a continued safe and enjoyable day. This has been a presentation from the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. And this presentation has been recorded and will be made available on our website. So thank you everyone, for our speakers and to our participants. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you very much.